Well, now we're live. We weren't live, and it didn't play the intro. So,
What?
I
how
saw the
about that?
intro.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, good
well,
evening, folks. Welcome to the Sasquatch Experience. It's me, your host, Sean, the Fork Chop Forker. That's James Baker, Henry May, and Vance Nesbitt. As we bring you once again another episode, season 4 into the missing phenomena. Tonight, vanished, missing in Washington State. And guys, had a great episode with Seth Breedlove last week. It was nice to have Seth on, which is kind of funny because, speaking of Washington, you talk about the Olympic Project and you talk about the Olympic National Forest and the Olympic Peninsula and some just crazy things that are happening out that way that Derek Randall's and the team, Shane Corson, are investigating and putting out there some great, brilliant stuff with nests. And, I really feel like those guys are onto something out there. Very proud to call them, some of my favorite researchers to follow. It's an interesting place, especially when you start coupling it with missing people. And again, we get into this before we start off. We're not saying there's a connection. We're just saying there's a possibility. Well, I'm not saying it. The other ones may. I'm not saying it, but that's where we're at. But a good evening, guys. How are you now that I went off in that little verbal, oral diarrhea there? How you doing, gentlemen?
Oral.
I'm
I
good.
figured that's the word he'd pick up on too, is oral.
Mm.
Henry, how you doing?
Nah, he's all right.
He's good.
He's fine. He's
He's
fine.
frozen. Oh, now he's
That's
moving.
Are
That's
you
okay.
sure?
Listen, it's not live if we don't have a technical difficulty. Henry, if you're alive, give us a thumbs up.
Henry, you need some proof of life
Okay.
here, bro.
He'll catch up.
I'll do the thumbs up for him. Standing in for Henry May will be
There
there.
he
It
goes.
is.
All right. Very
It's all
good.
good.
All right, Vance, let's get started with this. What do you got?
What do I got?
Still above ground, so every day above ground's a good day.
How about it?
Are you
Very
sure
true.
you're above ground?
But sometimes when you don't move, I got to remind you because they're going to start throwing dirt on you. If you
Oh man.
Right. Who's
Your poor-
responsible?
poor Henry gets frozen there, but now he's unfrozen. So we got
Okay.
Henry unthawed. There we
Yeah.
go.
Very good. Keep
All
him warm.
right.
What have we got? Well, as far as the missing goes, which is a fascinating subject within itself, considering the fact, like you gave your own personal disclaimer, we're not saying that Sasquatch has anything to do with this, but it certainly is an outlet for explaining a lot of the missing. And with the large number of children that have gone missing up in
Over
the,
100.
yeah, up in the like you mentioned too in the Olympic, it's a fascinating place. There's a lot of mystique. There's a lot of mysteries that are still unsolved in that entire area with people that have gone missing. And again, who's going to hold the responsibility torch to locating these people or giving any kind of an explanation? There
Well,
isn't any.
In an odd coincidence, as we sit here and talk about missing people in Washington State, there's an active Amber Alert in progress.
Really?
Right now
Wow.
in Starbuck, Washington, in the area of Columbia County. It's sad. An Amber Alert, of course, meaning that there's a perpetrator involved.
Right.
So a potential perpetrator.
Mhm.
But these are the potentialities that you run into when you discuss these missing person cases. But there are so many where there's no explanation, no trace of a body, clothing, nothing, as if this person was just literally taken and pulled off the face of the earth.
Right. Well, a lot of these cases, and I would say probably about 99% of these cases, it's sudden. I mean, you'll have a child or a person within proximity or goes to attend whatever activity in these areas, and then within a matter of a blink of an eye, they're gone.
Yeah.
And there's
And then you
witnesses
have-
to that fact too.
And then you couple just the regular missing people cases that funnel through the Washington State Police, but then you also have the indigenous people that disappear, right? And then that
Right.
creates its own other step of bureaucracy because you have tribal police involved. If it happens on tribal land, if it's a tribal member and it happens off, tribal land, they're still notified, though they don't have jurisdiction. And you start getting into the jurisdictional issues, where it goes to like your tribal police, local, county, state, and then FBI
Right.
when an FBI gets involved in a missing
Right.
persons case. So I think some of the problem that they have, particularly in Washington State, is that issue, right? There's a lot of bureaucracy involved, and there's no central computerized system where they capture and collect all this evidence. And guys, as we find out from talking about this, these different spots across the country, that's not uncommon. There is no like centralized data processing and a national park system that
Right.
parks system that communicates with law enforcement and so on and so forth. I think really, if we could fix the infrastructure and get something going on, that could help potentially find or solve some of these missing people cases.
Right. No, and I agree with you too, but
Go
there
ahead,
are
James.
egos involved. Yeah, go ahead, Baker.
Indeed.
Well, and that was what I was going to get at. It's not as much the infrastructure. Like, if you look at like our local community, like I know some cops in Muncie, I know some cops in South Williamsport, I know some cops in Williamsport, I know some people on the federal level, different things. They don't want to talk to each other because they might be doing something they don't want the other guys to be aware of or to slow that down, or they just don't want to give somebody else credit for helping them.
Mm-hmm.
And we always talk about the conspiracies of 9/11, but a big part of the reason when 9/11 got pulled off was because the CIA and the FBI chose not to talk to each other.
Well, yeah, we're not going to get political. There
No, I'm just
there
saying,
was a
the
political
groups-
wall put between the two of them. They didn't choose not to talk to each other. There was a political wall blocking them from talking to each other.
Right.
And I think a lot of this has to do with I want the notoriety of being the one that
I want
solved
to be the
this
one that
case.
found her.
The same problem that happens in the Bigfoot community. I want to be the one that actually discovers the Bigfoot and has the evidence and the proof of it. We're pushing others away that might have evidence and nope, this is my domain, this is my sphere, this is my little bubble. I'm working
This is
in
my
it, and nobody
kickball
else will
court.
come in to help. And so again, I brought up the word ego. I think that has a lot to do with a lot of these missing cases.
And it could, right? From jurisdictional issues to a lack of information to really boils down to a lack of real concrete evidence of being able to locate people. Hell, you talk about at times there's no scent, nothing for search or track dogs to catch on and go after, which in itself is very strange.
Bad weather.
Bad weather. Like you go into the whole missing 411 phenomena, and I hate to call it the missing 411 phenomena because David Paulides, what he did is he took some tenets, like a list of commonalities between all these cases, put them in a list, and said if you can check these off, they all fall within this puzzle. And I respect that because there are an awful lot of similarities there, more than what I would say would be a coincidence, right? A coincidence wouldn't happen as often as this does. And if looking at some of those points for the the missing 411, they happen. But these people, you got 100 missing kids. That's just kids. That's not counting regular people. 100 missing kids in the state of Washington. At least 25 missing indigenous people. One person missing is too many.
Right.
Yep.
But you're talking about a large number of people, and that's just in one state, not counting all the people that go missing every day. And there's got to be something.
I find that I have a hard time with the fact when the indigenous that live in the area go missing, and there's no notoriety to those cases at all. The notoriety comes into the tourism that comes in and goes missing. That's where the search ramps up and goes hot and heavy to try to find that person. But yet the indigenous go missing, and it's like, well, okay. I have a problem with that because there's so many cases of those that are the indigenous people that live in the area, or even if you don't want to refer to them as indigenous, but their family lineage had been there for years. And if one of them goes missing, there's just seems to be no traction as far as trying to find recovery in media coverage, as far as the press is concerned, as far as search and rescue is concerned. But if you have a family from Iowa drive out there in their motorhome and their child goes missing, all of a sudden it's all over all their local news stations, if not national news stations, that this child is gone or this individual is gone. I think that's kind of unfair.
Right, but can I ask a question of is, so you look at, I'm going to use Friday the 13th as a reference. You looked at, if you watch the recent one, this guy's sister and her friends get murdered by Jason. He's the only one looking for it. The local cops kind of looked for her, but like all the neighbors to the lake said, she ain't missing, she's dead. You don't walk certain places. So the question is do some of the locals know, hey, we're just going to give up on this person because we understand this is like the 5th person in 5 years and we know these things happen, compared to me, a guy that's not local there, that says, hey, my sister's missing. I don't care how many people are going to tell me this. I'm going to keep showing up, and I'm going to keep showing up with more people. The unlocal guy, and I can even reference from my personal life. I lived in one of the worst projects in Johnstown. And the thing is that they left me alone because I didn't live in that area naturally. And secondly, I left them alone. There would be, weird stuff up the street or whatever like that. And those people would be like, no, we're not going to mess with him. Not because I was threatening or whatever, but because not being a local meant that if they did something stupid to me, there could be people from outside of the community coming at them.
Notice it, right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's a good point. It's still unfair, though.
Yeah.
It's still unfair to the indigenous.
Well, we didn't care about them when we were making them non-indigenous.
Yeah.
You're not wrong.
Yeah. But that's a whole different political spectrum that I didn't want to jump into. I just think that
but the lack of respect is
what's good for one should be good for all. That's all.
But that's a point that was made.
Race.
That's a point that was made when that Gabby, the social media influencer, went missing. We spend so much time focusing on a certain group of people that there's a whole, there's a whole category of folks that have gone missing that nobody's cared as much about. Mm-hmm. And it's not being political. It's just making a point that, a missing person is a missing person. That's the only thing that should matter.
Right.
Yep.
Nothing else that should matter until we find that person. And look, I've had my own issues the last few weeks with certain things surrounding that. Mm-hmm. It's not an uncomfortable position to be in when you need help, and all of a sudden, because you mention somebody's race, all of a sudden they're not as important.
Right.
That's all I'm saying, and it happens.
No. Yeah, it does happen.
But you look at Washington itself. You go to the BFRO website, 701 Bigfoot sightings. It's like 3 times as much as any other state that's listed in the BFRO database. Mm-hmm. Very wooded state, very frontier. In its remoteness, if there's a place Bigfoot's going to exist in the United States, it's definitely going to be Washington State.
Right. Very true.
There's just, aside from, trying to, make the correlation that, Sasquatch is responsible for the missing people, just participating in everyday activities in the areas, in the wilderness areas is perilous in itself. It could be a great cause of, the reason as to many of these missing people sightings. I'm not saying it's the only thing, but the, treacherousness of the terrain, the varying levels of experience between the people participating in those activities probably has an awful lot to do with that. But because of that, there's an awful lot of people engaged in search and rescue in Washington State. So Derek Randall's, of course, being one of them. And without getting into the one case we're going to talk about after the news break, because the news break, Vance has it set up well, that's going to carry us into that. There's some strange things. Strange things happening. This one article I pulled up, Vance, 25 people in Yakima County on updated list of missing indigenous people, and that's just on the Yakima Reservation. An awful lot of people, and one of the things they haven't ruled out is potential serial killer
Right.
as a reason that this could happen. But
This is
Yakima County
true.
in itself, 21 reports listed in the database.
So, and this thought crossed my mind too. So, a serial killer is going to remove the body away from the possessions in which these people bring with them, which would be pretty much the same thing a Sasquatch would do. Remove the person from the personal property. Now, how many cases do we find where the property or the campsite or the vehicle and the possessions, the purse, the cell phones, the shoes, whatever it may be, is so far separated from if and where the body has been discovered?
And that's where it gets fascinating, right? Because you'll find a random shoe 3 miles from the place. You find another
Where
part
they
of their
were last seen,
possessions.
right?
Yeah.
Right.
Now you have the the reasoning that perhaps hypothermia set in, and as people become hypothermic, for some reason the body starts signaling for you to start shedding your clothes, and you have that probability of something happening too. But man,
I've
I
never
just
been
don't
in that
know.
state though. To say,
No, me
okay,
either.
I've been hypothermic
Yeah.
where I'm feeling like I'm overheated and I need to, get naked in the snow, might make for an interesting article. But other than that, I think people
Vance
would try
Nesbitt
and
found nude.
run the
Naked in
other
the snow.
direction,
Advanced Nebbit.
right? But it's a strange physiology reaction to have that. Like I said, I haven't had that experience to say, because when I'm cold, and it seems I just keep getting colder and shiver more and more and more. I don't ever have that sensation of, boy, am I hot? No, not really.
Fourth highest rate of missing people, Washington State.
Yeah,
The fourth
right,
highest.
right.
That's pretty high. And I know when we set out to do this, we were going to do a lot of episodes. But folks, I can tell you, just from the experience of doing these episodes, it gets a little depressing. Like
Well, sure it
putting
does.
yourself in this mindset, reading about these missing people, the amount of empathy that we have for, not trying to being very careful not to sensationalize these people and their stories to promote a podcast to talk about Bigfoot. That's not
Right.
the whole reason we did this. We did this to, can you paint a picture? Can you make the connection between the two? In some instances, you can. Last show we did when we're talking about Grand Canyon, the Mogollon Monster, little harder to make that connection, I think. But you go to
Right.
the Smoky Mountains, you could definitely make a case there, especially with the, Dennis Martin story, and you have the Keys family and their observations.
Right.
Not a lot of those, though, in Washington.
Right.
Right. And you'd think that perhaps because it is a very Sasquatch-centric, Bigfoot popular state, and unless I missed a memo somewhere, don't really hear a lot of stories like that.
No, but then let's also take a look too that, in my opinion, I would assume that throughout at least the lower 48 states, and we'll include Canada in that too, that these bipedal creatures probably have a different physiology from those on the West Coast as to those on the East Coast, and may have a different mentality or aggressiveness or non-aggressiveness, and maybe missing cases are different throughout the country, whereas you may have a lot of cases, and we have very famous cases that happen up in the Pacific Northwest as opposed to what happens in the Adirondacks or in the Smoky Mountains.
Kinda-
Maybe it's just a different type of personality of this creature.
Kind of
I
like
tell
the
you-
brown bear versus the grizzly.
I tell you one report that kind of struck at me when I was going through this. It was from August of '96 on the BFRO website by a lady named Linda Durrell. She reported it April 13th, 1997. I'm sorry, I got the year wrong. But it was in the summer of '96, and she and her daughter were driving along, looking down at the river, looking for deer and eagles, and they see this dark figure at the edge of the water behind some bushes. And, I'm not going to read the whole report because I don't want to take that time, but they see this figure twice on the same road.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing a Bigfoot once is, odds making
that's
on
a
that.
trophy
you might wanna
right there.
Put
Yeah.
put some bets in Vegas, but to see it twice on the same road,
True.
it was very interesting. And I'm sitting here thinking that this lady was out on her own, didn't have anybody else with her, was out on foot, not in her vehicle. So happens to run into this thing twice. I'm putting myself in the mindset: is this thing following her and keeping pace? That maybe she's not so lucky. Maybe it's,
Right.
pursuing
Maybe it's an
or paying
observation
attention
of
to
what
her,
she's
right?
doing, and then sees that there's another one involved, and who knows?
That one just it gets me. And then the other ones of where people are camping. You get the wood knocks and the screams, and I wonder in those instances that if that's a safety and numbers deal, if they were isolated in single campers, would they have the same experiences? Not that I want to try it or test it by any means, but you have people out there very solo, very alone, and you get some strange feelings. And I think even if you go to listen to our friend Sharon LeGros show Into the Fray, and she's talking to Derek Randalls and Derek's experience out there, in the woods, that was a frightening experience. I wouldn't want to go with, I
Right.
wouldn't want to have. And I've had my own experience, but I was with others. I couldn't imagine having an experience like his, where he's hearing those sounds and, almost like that bluff charge.
Right, coming down the
I don't know.
mountainside, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Like, I don't know if I would exactly want to be able to experience that. Or now I'm going even one step further. Would I survive that?
Mm-hmm.
Would I be one of those people that have now end up on the side of the milk carton or the proverbial poster in the post office?
Which is an interesting thing when you bring that up, because when you are sharing the story of your experience, and I'm speaking of whoever is sharing their experience,
Yeah.
when you're telling the story via podcast or newspaper article, whatever, it has a definitive end. And you are alive to tell the story. But when it's happening to you in real time, you don't know what the outcome is going to be.
No.
And when you're
No.
hearing a bluff charge coming down a mountain at you that sounds like a bulldozer and elephants, you don't know what the outcome is going to be. And the terror factor, is skyrocketed. You don't know if you'll ever be able to share that story. And there's probably a number of cases where that story has not been shared because of the demise that happened in the end of it.
Well, before we fester on that thought for a few minutes, thanks, Vance. We got to step into our news break because it's already that time. Gone through that first part of the show. Folks, you're listening to Sasquatch Experience here on YouTube, Facebook Live. You'll be catching this later through your favorite podcast distributor. We prefer Spotify. Cheap plug. Folks, you can find us Sasquatch Experience on Facebook or Instagram, Squatch EXP on Twitter, and for as little as $2 a month, you can subscribe and support us over at our Patreon, patreon.com/Sasquatch Experience. Folks, I'm Sean Forker. We'll be back right after the break. We got Vance Nesbitt taking us into the stranger than fiction news. Catch you in 5.
Yes, it's the Stranger Than Fiction news and stories brought to you by some funny-looking soaps and shampoos from Dr. Squatch. Visit Dr. Squatch for some amazing savings. And by some shapely men over at the Sasquatch Experience. You can become part of the experience for as little as $2 a month. Just visit patreon.com/Sasquatch Experience. And now, page 1. Back in April of 2017, Jacob Gray rode his bicycle during a rainstorm into Washington State's Olympic National Park and vanished. The 22-year-old's bike and camping gear were discovered near the Soul Duck River, but otherwise there was no trace of him. Several months of search and rescue missions uncovered nothing. According to the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, more than 600,000 persons go missing in the United States every year. anywhere between 89 and 92% of those missing people are recovered every year, either alive or deceased. But how many of those disappear in the wild is unclear. Neither the Department of the Interior, which oversees the National Park Service, or the Department of Agriculture, U.S. Forest Services, keeps track. Strangely, the most reliable info on missing people in the wild comes from Bigfoot hunters. In 2011, David Paulides, founder of the North American Bigfoot Search, launched a database of wildland disappearances that occurred under mysterious circumstances. From his research, there are at least 1,600 people, give or take, currently missing in the wild somewhere in the United States. Now, most people, according to his data, disappear in the late afternoon and during or just before severe weather. Bodies are often found in previously searched areas, and often without clothing or footwear, even when hypothermia has been ruled out. During the last stages of hypothermia, though, people often feel hot and remove their clothing. Children are sometimes found at improbably far distances from where they went missing. The biggest obstacle to getting any information about missing people in the wild, according to David Paulides, is the National Park Service's red tape. He speculates that the Park Service conceals the true data on how and where people disappear and how many have actually been found, because it would shock the public so badly that visitor numbers would probably drop off. The National Park Service certainly doesn't advertise that there are dozens of still missing visitors in the Grand Canyon or Yosemite, and the county sheriff isn't going to put missing person on his re-election poster. Now, the odds of locating Jacob Gray were beyond finding a needle in a haystack. Despite a several-month coordinated effort by hundreds of park rangers, local police, and volunteers, they have found no trace of him. But Randy Gray, Jacob's father, wasn't about to give up so easily. A 63-year-old house builder from Santa Cruz, California, he went on to liquidate his entire world in order to find his son. He sold his house and shuttered his successful contracting business. Loading up an Arctic Fox slide-in camper with food and gear, Randy invited Paulides to join him as he set out for Washington. And probably the most disturbing in the editorial here is that national parks like Yosemite operate almost as sovereign states. When somebody goes missing in the territory, they're not inclined to seek help from outside government agencies. It would kind of like be the United States asking Mexico for COVID-19 ventilators. There's pride at stake, and egos, and not to mention budgets. A virus is just as invisible as a missing person. Thanks for listening to this edition of the Stranger Than Fiction news and stories to wrap up our season of The Missing. And now back to our regularly scheduled program.
And thank you, Vance. I consider myself a shapely person.
I knew
I
you'd
really
come back
do.
with that. I kind of figured.
That was the way I was going to come out of that break. You know that. Thanks for the news, Vance.
Wow.
We talk about Randy Gray, and honestly, the book The Cold Vanish, a hell of a good book. James and I actually listened to it on the way back from the Hocking Hills Bigfoot Conference. It is written by John Billman, and you can get a copy of it on Amazon, anywhere you can get books. It's worth the read, because really, I mean, it talks about a couple different cases, but really focuses on the Jacob Gray disappearance. It's actually recommended to me by Mark Madsky.
Right.
And it does reference Derek Randall's in there, and, the desperation that Randy went through to find his son.
Mm-hmm. And rightfully
like any
so.
parent, and rightfully so. But I mean, you're right. The man liquidated his life. Everything he, put it into that Arctic Fox, and went on his way. Stayed at the Bigfoot bar out there a few times, and
Right.
worked
Got
with Derek
transferred?
Randall's. Followed up on psychics that told him that he was living with a family of Bigfoot, and as crazy as some of those things seem, when you're desperate to find your kid, your
Yep.
son,
Right.
what lead would you not follow up on that lead if it was a lead, no matter
But
how
again,
fantastic it was?
the typical part of the case
Pardon me.
is all his belongings were discovered,
Yeah,
but he wasn't.
no, the
His
bicycle and everything.
his campsite, yeah, it was all intact, and they found that, but he's nowhere to be found. It seems very nefarious to me.
Well, they did find his body.
Yeah,
Yeah, he
yes,
was
yes,
he was
they did.
found. He was found years later. Actually, I
Right,
think.
right. No, you're right, and
Well, it's found. It wasn't found years later. I thought it was found like within like the year, because the father wouldn't go anywhere. Like the father
Yeah.
shut down everything, bought a car.
mhm.
Yeah, and it's so true. Like as a father myself, my son's right here. My youngest son, my 11-year-old. There's his hand. Sitting here with me, listening to the show tonight, and if something happened to him and he went missing, I'd do everything I could too to find him.
Well, sure.
I don't think there's a thing that I wouldn't consider a lead wise to try to locate one of my kids. And when you read the book, you really go through the anguish, and like even the authors, like I think at some point tries to break through to them and like, man, maybe you shouldn't do so much of this. And it's like, well, tough shit. That's my kid. I got to do whatever
Right.
I can.
Right.
And it really took its toll on him. I don't know. Is Randy still alive?
I believe so.
Randy Gray?
Yeah, I believe so.
If there's somebody that should get a medal, it should be that man. Let me tell you.
Yeah. Well, this all goes back to what my point was earlier, that, which I brought up in the editorial, is that, the national park system acts as a sovereign nation and doesn't take outside help. A, for ego reasons, and B, it's a monetary thing. They really don't want this publicized because, I can see that, a lot of visitation to the national parks would probably drop off dramatically if the numbers were made public as to how many people are going missing in a very mysterious circumstance. And again, we don't know exactly what transpired with Jacob Gray. We don't know if it was just an accident, but then again, why are all your belongings discovered in one spot and your body is not? That's what I find.
Well, and again, we could go into 42 different, hypotheses as to what could have, transpired in scenarios and run them through our head. But, how do we start connecting this to Bigfoot? Right? Jacob Gray aside, because we know that ended tragically, but potentially nothing involved in that scenario. Consider this. How many reports are there out there of hunters feeling like they're being stalked or people being stalked through the woods by these beings? It's not that uncommon.
Right.
From vocalizations to, rock throwings to tree knockings. Like there's always a time at some point they make themselves apparent. Doesn't always have to be at night, folks. A lot of these reports I read happen during the day.
In the afternoon, a lot of
yeah.
cases, sure.
Particularly
and a lot of
in that
terms that are
region.
used is being paralleled. That's a very common term now in the Bigfoot community, is being paralleled.
Well, it happened to a case I investigated here in 2007. A lady living outside of Muncie was actually riding her bicycle and felt she heard something walking on the ridge below her, and she had rocks thrown at her. Thinking it was a kid, she stopped to look and caught a glimpse of something running away from her that wasn't a kid. But it followed her home.
No, that's creepy.
And then at another instance, she noticed her garbage can was opened and the garbage bag was physically picked up and removed, taken to another part of the property and gone through. Not ripped open like a bear would have went through it. Picked up and went through by something. And I investigated that myself. And still get the little goosebumps thinking about that one because of just the creepiness factor out of it.
You need an opposable thumb for that type of activity. It would seem
and
anyway.
you know, unfortunately, you lose contact with the witness. But I'm sure if she had ongoing things, she'd have stayed in contact. But
Right.
or she moved, one or the other. I don't think she lives out there anymore. But something to
But
consider.
see,
That that's
again,
happening in Pennsylvania.
in a circumstance like that, she didn't know what the outcome and the end story was going to be in this whole thing. You know what I'm saying? It's not until the activity subsides that you start to share your story, and it's like, wow, that's a really interesting story. But when you're living in it in real time, you don't know what the end result is going to be, and that
No,
is the scare factor in scope.
Henry, what's your thoughts on this, bud? Little delay.
Henry.
Well,
Give him a minute.
I had a
There we
question.
go. Sure.
I had a bit of a question. What happens when somebody goes missing and it goes against the pattern? Let's say there's no boulder strewn field. Let's say there's no severe weather.
Mm-hmm.
What happens in that instance? I guess it doesn't necessarily have to fit fully into the pattern for it to be accepted into the phenomena. Right? I think there's just I think David Paulides even said himself, there's no requisite to how many checks on the list this thing has to these sightings have to, check off. It's just the fact that throughout many of these there's just many of these that are that have all these similarities to them, I guess.
Right. Well, David does break it down into, I believe it was 12 different categories of events that take place, but not all 12 have to be, like you said, Sean, have a check mark next to it in order for it to become part of it. If there's 3 out of that 12 that get a check mark, that makes it in the probability of something unusual or a phenomena that is happening. We just bring up the fact that in a lot of these cases, the check mark goes next to bad weather after the person goes missing and search and rescue is called in, and then they have to call it off due to weather.
And I have the profile
in more cases than not happening, but it doesn't happen in all cases.
Yeah.
No, we don't know.
And let's just go through this list real quick, Vince, because I have it right here in front of me.
Okay.
My missing 411 profile points there, if you could catch it on my handy dandy notepad. Point of separation, right? That initial point where they become disconnected from the rest of the people or they become disappeared. Right. Time of disappearance, most common mid to late afternoon. Right. Oddly enough, in some of these areas, that's where a lot of these Bigfoot sightings happen around the same time, right? Boulder fields.
Right.
Near water. Bad weather events. Rain, snow, something happens and kicks up not soon long after. Disability or illness. Canines cannot find scent or lose track quickly. That one's really telling to me because we've seen search dogs in action, James. We know how trained they are.
Oh, yeah.
They end up being found in a previously searched area.
Right.
That one's got a little Todd C's, catch to it there for our alien friends.
Right.
Missing clothes. And then sometimes ultimately an unknown cause of death.
Right. Right. No, and it's an interesting checklist.
Yeah.
And I'll go back to what your point was too with the scent dogs. Again, it is a remarkable training feat for these dogs. And of course, you're not just grabbing any kind of Shih Tzu. No, not at all. Or Chihuahua. No, these
you're
dogs,
really not.
Yeah. The Bloodhound is probably the most prominent one to be able to pick up scent. But what would cause the scent to just vanish? It would seem, though, that the body would have had to have been picked up and carried away. without the body leaving any scent on trees or on the ground. And when the dogs lose that scent, that again, I'm at a loss of words, but it seems like, the body would have levitated off the ground and making any kind of contact with any physical presence on the ground to leave a scent behind. And the dogs would be able to pick it up.
It's hit my face on my microphone again.
Again.
You do wonder, though, from past interactions that we hear of dogs and Bigfoot, that if they did come across a smell of that nature, would they even follow it?
Right.
Given that they have that almost genetically wired alarm system built into it, would they even follow that scent?
Right.
So maybe it's the fact that they can't find the scent. Maybe it's the fact they're just not gonna.
Yeah, and I had that thought the other night that the relationship between a Bigfoot and dogs, because so many cases of dogs are either hiding under the porch, they're terrified, and those dogs, just like in our 911 opening segment, my dog went missing. The dog was broken off the chain. A dog won't break the leash or the chain on its own. It just doesn't have the strength. But when a dog is broken off its lead and is missing, I don't know if these things use a dog as a meal or use it as a pet or use it for any other purpose. I have no idea, but there's so many cases. I mean, there's a handfuls of cases where the dogs go missing.
But a dog in general won't try to break the chain unless something's causing them distress.
Right.
Like you can't, like you chain a dog in the backyard and they do whatever they need to do. And when the chain ends, they're like, okay, that's my perimeter and da-da-da. But like, honestly, like from having a dog, like my dog has wrapped his chain across the tree 3 or 4 times. And instead of trying to pull it anymore, he just waits till somebody frees him. Yeah. They only really would want to break a chain if something's distressing them.
Right.
No, that's a really good point too, James.
Or if something broke the chain.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not going to jump into that, but something broke the chain to take the dog with it. And we've known of cases, we've talked about them on here, where a bipedal creature is walking with a canine, including the 7 shoots photo, which looks like if this thing's holding a dog. I don't know if that's the case. I've never proven that one way or another, but it's kind of peculiar.
Yeah, I don't know. It just adds more mystery to this. You look into these cases. Like I said, the activities that get to me really become those of the hunters being stalked. Repeat contact with these beings when you are in the woods, which isn't uncommon as you would think it is. These stalking scenarios. And I don't want to say more so now than before. Actually, I think you used to get a lot of these stalking scenarios from the older reports. And I think it's just because people were paying more attention.
Right. That's a good point.
Now when you go out into the woods, you got your damn iPhone with you. You're taking pictures and selfies. You're not really out there with the express interest of being one with nature or really enjoying it. It's more of a social media activity, right, than it is a, hell, even our friends going out there making these documentaries, you're going out there with the purpose of filming Bigfoot, and by the time you're done dicking around with your equipment and everything, you could have missed the opportunity.
Okay, which brings me to a point that I would put out there publicly for anybody. If, and I brought this up to you, Sean, a couple days ago, if and when you do record something in a video format, whether it is good or bad, but it is mysterious, however, please don't send it off and add music to it.
Don't do it, you bastards.
Very much like you're trying to hide something.
I will punch you in the face.
Yeah, you put music under the background of this video, and it just takes away all the authenticity of it to begin with.
There's no need for it.
If it's real, just leave it be as it is and let the researchers and curious minds take a look at it and give their opinions.
Well, that you're silencing the audio, you could be suppressing some interesting information from that video,
Sure, absolutely.
good or
Bird
bad.
calls
Steve
or
Cole's.
squirrels chirping, whatever. That's very important to what might be transpiring in the video, but no, you had to ruin it and put music in there.
Yeah. Our friend Steve
Also-
Coles did a whole episode last night or the night last week, maybe. I don't know. It was a recent episode. Sorry, Steve. I got it wrong. About, the people's behavior that are actually taking the video and how you're able to identify their behavior if they're a hoax or not. And sometimes those subtleties in their behavior are obscured by the stupid music or other attributes of the video because you're not paying
Right.
attention. Right. You're just distracting more and more from the content of the video. So I thought that was a good video to put out there.
Right.
So good job,
Very
Steve,
true.
always educating us on
Yeah, just leave
on
the
these
material alone, leave it
Yeah.
raw, and let us take a
Don't-
look at it.
Don't zoom it in, zoom it out, cut it up, whatever. If it's a 5-minute clip, give the whole 5 minutes.
Mhm.
Let them rip it up as they wish. They should notice when you turned it on, and they should notice when the camera hit the ground.
Right.
You know?
No, I agree with you, Bake. Yeah, let the whole
If you
thing
didn't-
play out. Even
if
if
you
it's
didn't
10
turn-
minutes of
Yep.
nothing and then there's something that happens at the end of the
Yep.
10 minutes. So what?
Yep.
Let the whole thing play out because there might be some serious evidence in there just in audio.
Yep.
But,
Even if
yeah,
it's
okay,
just-
that's my commentary. That's all.
Yep.
Just don't add music. Because there's some fascinating videos out there. I shared one with you, Sean. It's fascinating video. It looks
Yeah.
like this thing is digging around in the ground and stands up to walk off in the woods. I'm like, wow, that's really cool. But God darn it, why is there music thrown in here? I don't want to hear music. I just want to see the raw footage. It gives more authenticity to it. But when you put music in there, I have to agree with your sentiment, Sean. It seems like you're trying to hide something when you do that.
Well, you are. You're doing something, and either way, you're taking away from the, the purpose of the
Authenticity of
video,
whatever.
right? The
Right,
authenticity.
Right.
I was trying to find some compelling stories from Washington State of missing people to talk about, but the Jacob Gray one was the one I was kind of fixated. So I apologize we didn't go into a little bit more depth on that. But you do look at that map that they threw out there. You could find it on Reddit. And I think somebody might have posted it in the Sasquatch Experience page on Facebook of the underground cave systems that run, across the country, and how odd it is that those hot spots line up almost perfectly with these underground caverns. And then we do know up in Washington State, just to the geography, there are lava tubes and, hidden dangers you could find yourselves subjecting to. I'm not saying, folks, that every missing person out in Washington State or anywhere has to be a Bigfoot. In fact, I'm kind of saying the opposite. I'm trying to find a way to disprove that it has to be anything besides just either foul play or by another human
Or
or
an accident,
accidental, right?
Right.
But the reality is, in these areas where they're missing them, sometimes there's also a high concentration of Bigfoot sightings.
Right.
Washington State's the fourth largest state in the United States with missing people. It's also the largest state with the most Bigfoot sightings, according to a database.
Mm-hmm.
So you put two and two together, what do you come up with? Well,
Right.
Oftentimes, as uncomfortable as it may be, we may want to look at the fact that, hey, hell, it could be something there.
Right. But again, let's put predation into the whole aspect too, that other animals would take a human for predation purposes. So if a bipedal creature exists, why wouldn't that fall into the same realm? It may very well. And I'm not saying that maybe they're being abducted for predation purposes. I don't know. Maybe it's just a curiosity thing. But if you have a mountain lion or a grizzly bear or even a black bear to take out a human in a predation case, then a bipedal creature may be doing the same thing. And we'll go back to, stories and lore of Gigantopithecus blackie that had interactions with, pre-humans for the same reason. At least in lore, anyway. I'm just going through historical readings, but it would seem as though this thing took an interest with humans in order for predation purposes. I don't know. So what separates a grizzly bear, maybe from its intelligence to a bipedal creature, that might be one thing. But if it's going to, use a person as opportunistic as a target, why would not a bipedal creature look at as human as a very prospective type of target?
July 1984, Clallam County, Washington, sighting by a school group on a summer field trip. That one's kind of frightening, right? All of a sudden, you've got school kids observing this thing. September 2004, family and friends hear late-night vocalization from their home near Lake Sutherland. 1977, camper experiences odd odors and sounds, feels presence.
Oh, well, that's because Baker was there. That's why.
Well, just think about that. Feels presence, right?
Feel your presence.
Oh,
Right.
goodness.
No, I get
But
it.
that report in itself also references dog behavior. But then you go to August 2009, hikers have strange encounters and find human-like footprints in the Buckhorn Wilderness.
Right. And that's one thing that we didn't bring up in this whole missing aspect is, the physical evidence in these areas. It's not only witness encounters that have seen something, but there's physical evidence left behind too, primarily footprints. So you have to throw that into the equation too. And I think David Paulides does that without actually doing it.
Well, you got Pierce County, Vance, which is like in sort of the center, almost like the center part of the state in a way. I guess it's towards the coastal range more than the center. It could be considered the center of the state. I don't know. I don't live in Washington, so Pennsylvania is a little different about what you consider things. So I don't want to speak out of turn. 81 reports in that county. A lot of vocalizations, man.
Right.
And like I searched through these just to get some idea. A lot of road sighting, a lot of road crossings, a lot of vocalizations. Young campers, possible encounter in their tent, September 2011. Like those are the ones that pique my interest more than vocalizations because you have predatory behavior.
Right.
Right? Like something if it was just one person. Just think about that. If you were just one person, what would be what's the difference? You may end up on the other side of that list. That's why I'm a safety and numbers kind of guy. I don't believe in being alone. And I'm not trying to dissuade people from doing that. For God's sakes, though, if you are, follow David's rules and get yourself one of those locator beacons so people can find your ass when you do get abducted. But
and what you brought up too with the vocalizations, there's a lot of recorded vocalizations from that area from a lot of these witnesses that had their iPhones or their whatever device they had, digital recorders that were actually recording this. And again, it doesn't fall on the spectrum of a known animal.
Yeah. And how do you relate that? Well, I guess we could wrap this episode up by saying we're no closer to solving this puzzle than we were when we started weeks ago. The more and more we look into it, the creepier it gets because the more we can start making connections. But there is a reality piece to this, right? The fact is, folks, people are missing. Over 100 kids missing in the state of Washington. And if you have any information that could help locate any of those missing children, contact the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, missingkids.org, or call 24/7 hotline 1-800-843-5678. Once again, that number is 1-800-843-5678, missingkids.org. And the National Park Service, their investigative services branch, 1-888-653-0009. Once again, that's 1-888-653-0009. You can go to their website, nps.gov/ISB. And that's where you can help add some, context for folks that may be, investigating some of these missing people's claims. Because there's a lot of them, guys. It's strange. I guess before we sign off, did you guys watch any of that new documentary on the History Channel the other night?
No. 'Cause I
Henry,
really
did you
don't
watch that?
care much about Bigfoot. No, I'm just kidding.
We have some delay with Henry, I think.
Did you watch it?
I'm sorry,
we
I'm
have a-
watching Henry do like a Japanese commercial here.
We're getting Henry. I did watch it, and
Buy popcorn.
I did watch the documentary, and I found it to be just run of the mill, nothing earth shattering. Kathy Strain on there, and Kathy always presents herself well. Dr. Meldrum, Bill Munns, Bill Munns, a year ago when we had that conversation back on Super NMRL, when we talked with John Johnson and the potential of him having the lost footage from the Patterson film or the missing reel, Bill Munns wanted to come on and give an alternate take, and I did say we'd do it, and we never got back to it.
Right.
So maybe after we come back from the holiday break, we get Bill Munns on here and talk a little Patterson Gimlin. Not
would
my
be
favorite
awesome.
topic, but
No, but
you
still.
get experts on here to talk about these things,
Yeah.
makes it a little bit more fresh, right? And of course, Dr. Meldrum was on there. Busy year for us. Next year, 2022 is going to be the year Sasquatch Experience goes on the road a little bit. Going to be at the Ohio Bigfoot Conference. Going to be at the Great Smoky Mountain Bigfoot Conference. So
Right.
actually going to have a nice sized table at the Smoky Mountain Bigfoot Conference.
Yeah, and I'm going to be on my patio for my patio conference and the Mothman conference, and then back on my patio conference, and I get
We're
it.
going to be everywhere. But folks, this show only happens because of listeners like you, viewers like you. And you can continue to support us by either listening to this show and the podcast, which if you're not a subscriber to our Patreon, you do have ads, but I apologize. It pays the bills. Or you can go to patreon.com/Sasquatch Experience starting for $2 a month, as little as $2 a month. You can get the episodes ad-free. We post a lot of free content on there for our listeners. The Sasquatch Experience caricature did come out that are getting mailed out to our experiencers. That's pretty cool. Just a lot of things we got going on. We got a couple watch-alongs on there that you can watch some of your favorite Bigfoot horror movies with us and get some very interesting off-color commentary.
Yes, I saw it.
Sasquatch
It was pretty good.
Yeah.
Henry is stuck in a time warp because I
Yes,
think
he
we're
is.
just
No.
now getting
To the time warp.
we're just now getting the answer to the question I asked 5 minutes ago. So wow, what a great Henry was great before we went on the show tonight. I wish we could have got these technical difficulties worked out because he was a ball of energy before we came on the air.
Now he's just a ball.
And now he's just stuck in oblivion. And of course, James Baker, his usual effervescent self. You know, if there's nature's original laxative, his name is James Baker. Folks,
geez.
Oh my God! No,
thanks
that's
for tuning in.
Pancake.
Stay tuned to the Facebook for more information about our next show. I don't know if it'll be the next couple weeks. It may not be till 2022, but you really don't know if we're going to drop something special on you.
Yeah, we'll
Stay
drop
tuned.
something special.
So again, if you don't hear from us before then, have a Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, a Happy Hanukkah, everything else you celebrate, a joyous Kwanzaa. If you like it, we love it because we love you. And we'll see you again soon, folks. Keep on squatching, and you all be safe.
You've been listening to Sasquatch Experience. Please rate and review wherever this podcast is.
Henry got all pale.
To share your
with the
experience,
missing
visit us on
sign coming
Facebook
across
or
the-
email us, squatchexperience@gmail.com. Keep on squatching. You've been listening to Sasquatch Experience. Please rate and review wherever this podcast is consumed. To share your experience, visit us on Facebook or email us, squatchexperience@gmail.com. Keep on squatching.